Hey everybody, welcome back. This is Reading Rituals with Miss Carmen. This week we're going to jump right into chapter 8 because we left off in the middle of the chapter, so we need to know what is happening. I know that we need to share some details about the program, why we're doing what we're doing, but I'm going to switch this up and do it at the end of this video so that parents and your friends and family can understand why we're reading for 100 days and what's the purpose of all of this. But right now, let's get back to it. So for those of you that were with us in the last video, we read through about the middle of chapter 8, and what had happened was Stuart got sick. Does anybody remember what happened to him? Why he came down with the flu and why he was so sick? That's right. He accidentally got shut in and locked into the refrigerator, and his mom finally found him, but by that point he was already not feeling well. And when we left off was that another little creature had been rescued by the Little family. Does anyone remember? Yes, that's right. She's a little bird. She's not a duck. She's not a flying teddy bear like Gus and Susie May. She's a little bird, a beautiful bird. And so they were having a discussion the last time that we read, and they were taking Margalo's temperature to make sure she was healthy. So Stuart had mentioned that he hoped that his parents had found a decent place for her to sleep. So that's where we're going to pick up from. Oh, yes, Margalo replied. I'm going to sleep in the Boston Fern on the bookshelf in the living room. It's a nice place for a city location. And now, if you'll excuse me, I think I shall go to bed. I see it's getting dark outside. I always go to bed at sundown. Good night, sir. Please don't call me sir, cried Stuart. Call me Stuart. Very well, said the bird. Good night, Stuart. And she hopped off with light bouncing steps. Good night, Margalo, called Stuart. See you in the morning. Stuart settled back under the bedclothes again. That's a mighty fine bird, he whispered and sighed a tender sigh. Sounds to me like somebody has a little crush on that little bird. When Mrs. Little came in later to tuck Stuart in for the night and hear his prayers, Stuart asked her if she thought the bird would be quite safe sleeping down in the living room. Quite safe, my dear, replied Mrs. Little. What about that cat, Snowbell? Asked Stuart sternly. Snowbell won't touch the bird, his mother said. You go to sleep and forget all about it. Mrs. Little opened the window and turned out the light. Stuart closed his eyes and lay there in the dark, but he couldn't seem to go to sleep. He tossed and turned, and the bedclothes got all rumpled up. He kept thinking about the bird downstairs asleep in the fern. He kept thinking about Snowbell and about the way Snowbell's eyes gleamed. Finally, unable to stand it any longer, he switched on the light. There's just something in me that doesn't trust a cat, he muttered. I can't sleep knowing that Margalo is in danger. Pushing the covers back, Stuart climbed out of bed. He put on his wrapper and slippers. Taking his bow and arrow and his flashlight, he tiptoed out into the hall. Everybody had gone to bed, and the house was dark. Stuart found his way to the stairs and descended slowly and cautiously into the living room without making any noise. His throat hurt him, and he felt a little dizzy. Sick as I am, he said to himself, this has got to be done. Being careful not to make a sound, he stole across to the lamp by the bookshelf, shimmied up the cord, and climbed out onto the shelf. There was a faint ray of light for the street lamp outside, and Stuart could dimly see Margalo asleep in the fern, with her head tucked under her wing. Sleep dwell upon thine eyes, peace in thy breast, he whispered, repeating a speech he had heard in the movies. Then he hid behind a candlestick and waited, listening and watching. For half an hour he saw nothing, heard nothing but the faint ruffle of Margalo's wings when she stirred in dream. The clock struck 10 loudly, and before the sound of the last stroke had died away, Stuart saw 2 gleaming yellow eyes peering out from behind the sofa. So, thought Stuart, I guess there's going to be something doing after all. He reached for his bow and arrow. The eyes came nearer. Stuart was frightened, but he was a brave mouse, even when he had a sore throat. He placed his arrow against the cord of the bough and waited. Snowbell crept softly toward the bookshelf and climbed noiselessly up into the chair within easy reach of the Boston fern where Margalo was asleep. Then he crouched, ready to spring. His tail waved back and forth. His eyes gleamed bright. Stuart decided the time had come. He stepped out from behind the candlestick, knelt down, bent his bow, and took careful aim at Snowbell's left ear, which was the nearest one to him. This is the finest thing I've ever done, thought Stuart, and he shot the arrow straight into the cat's ear. Ouch! Snowbell squealed with pain and jumped down and ran off toward the kitchen. A direct hit, said Stuart. Thank heaven. Well, there's a good night's work done, and he threw a kiss toward Margalo's sleeping form. It was a tired little mouse that crawled into bed a few minutes later, tired but ready for sleep at last. And there is brave Stuart Little, saving Margalo's life, and she didn't even know it. Okay. We finished chapter 8. Let's go on to chapter 9 because we've only been at this for a few minutes. So let's rack up those reading minutes, all right? This next one is called A Narrow Escape. Margalo liked it so well at the Littles' house, she decided to stay for a while instead of returning to the open country. She and Stuart became fast friends, and as the days passed, it seemed to Stuart that she grew more and more beautiful. He hoped she would never go away from him. One day, when Stuart had recovered from bronchitis, he took his new skates and put on his ski pants and went to look for an ice pond. He didn't get far. The minute he stepped out into the street, he saw an Irish terrier, so he had to shimmy up an iron gate and jump into a garbage can where he hid in a grove of celery. And there he is, poor Stuart. He's hiding in that grove of celery. But he was lucky that he found a place to hide from that dog, isn't it? While he was there waiting for the dog to go away, a garbage truck from the Department of Sanitation drove up to the curb and two men picked up the can. Stuart felt himself hoisted high in the air. He peered over the side and saw that in another instant he and everything in the can would be dumped into the big truck. If I jump now, I'll kill myself, thought Stuart. So he ducked back into the can and waited. The men threw the can in with a loud bump into the truck where another man grabbed it, turned it upside down, and shook everything out. Stuart landed on his head, buried 2 feet deep in wet, slippery garbage. Ew. Poor Stuart. That could not have been very pleasant. All around him was garbage, smelling strong. Under him, over him, on all 4 sides of him, garbage. Just an enormous world of garbage and trash and smelly things. It was a messy spot to be in. He had egg on his trousers, butter on his cap, gravy on his shirt, orange pulp in his ear, and banana peel wrapped around his waist. Still hanging onto his skates, Stuart tried to make his way up to the surface of the garbage, but the footing was bad. He climbed a pile of coffee grounds, but near the top of the grounds, they gave way under him, and he slid down and landed in a pool of leftover rice pudding. I bet I'm going to be sick at my stomach before I get out of this, said Stuart. He was anxious to work his way up to the top of the pile because he was afraid of being squashed by the next can load of garbage. When at last he did succeed in getting to the surface, tired and smelly, he observed that the truck was not making any more collections, but was rambling rapidly along. Stuart glanced up at the sun. We're going east, he said to himself. I wonder what that means. And there goes Stuart in that garbage full of in that truck full of garbage. Oh no. What do you think is going to happen? There was no way for him to get out of the truck. The sides were too high. He just had to wait. When the truck arrived at the East River, which borders New York City on the east, and which is a rather dirty but useful river, the driver drove out onto the pier, backed up to the garbage scow, and dumped the load. Stuart went crashing and slithering along with everything else and hit his head so hard he fainted and lay quite still as though he were dead. He lay that way for almost an hour, and when he recovered his senses, he looked about him and saw nothing but water. The scow was being towed out to sea. Well, thought Stuart, this is about the worst thing that could happen to anybody. I guess this will be my last ride in this world. For he knew that garbage would be towed 20 miles out and dumped into the Atlantic Ocean. I guess there's nothing I can do about it, he thought helplessly. I'll just have to sit here bravely and die like a man. But I wish I didn't have to die with egg on my pants and butter on my cap and gravy on my shirt and orange pulp in my ear and a banana peel wrapped around my middle. The thought of death made Stuart sad, and he began to think of home and his father and mother and brother and Margalo and Snowbell and how he loved them all, well, all but Snowbell, and of what a pleasant place his home was, especially in the early morning with the light just coming through the curtains and the household stirring and waking. The tears came to his eyes when he realized he would never see them again. He was still sobbing when a small voice behind him whispered, "Stuart?" He looked around through his tears, and there, sitting on a Brussels sprout, was Margalo. "Margalo!" cried Stuart. "How did you get here?" "Well," said the bird, "I was looking out the window this morning when you left home, and I happened to see you get dumped into the garbage truck, so I flew out the window and followed the truck thinking you might need some help." "I've never been so glad to see anybody in my whole life," said Stuart. "But how are you going to help me?" "I think that if you'll hang on to my feet," said Margalo, "I can fly ashore with you. It's worth trying anyway. How much do you weigh?" 3.5 ounces, said Stuart. "With your clothes on?" asked Margalo. "Certainly," replied Stuart modestly. "Then I believe I can carry you all right. Suppose I get dizzy," said Stuart. "Don't look down," replied Margalo. "Then you won't get dizzy. Suppose I get sick at my stomach." "You'll have to be sick," the bird replied. "Anything is better than death." "Yes, that's true," Stuart agreed. "Hang on then. We may as well get started." Stuart tucked his skates into his shirt, stepped gingerly onto a tuft of lettuce, and took a firm grip of Margalo's ankles. "All ready," he cried. With a flutter of wings, Margalo rose into the sky, carrying Stuart along, and together they flew out over the ocean and headed home. Wow, what a wonderful friend. Can you imagine? Luckily, Stuart had a friend who was looking out for him, and I think that's really special. Hopefully, we all have friends like that, right? "Phew," said Margalo when they were high in the air. "You smell awful, Stuart." "I know I do," he replied gloomily. "I hope it isn't making you feel bad." "I can hardly breathe," she answered, "and my heart is pounding in my chest. Isn't there something you could drop to make yourself lighter?" "Well, I could drop these ice skates," said Stuart. "Goodness me," the little bird cried. "I didn't know you had skates hidden in your shirt. Toss those heavy skates away quickly, or we will both come down in the ocean and perish." Stuart threw his skates away and watched them fall down, down, till they disappeared in the gray waves below. "Whew, that's better," said Margalo. "Now we're all right. I can already see the towers and chimneys of New York." 15 minutes later, they flew through the open window of the Littles' living room and landed on the Boston fern. Mrs. Little, who had left the window up when she missed Margalo, was glad to see them back, for she was beginning to worry. When she heard what had happened and how near she had come to losing her son, she took Stuart in her hand, and even though his clothes were smelling nasty, she kissed him. And then she set him upstairs to take a bath and sent George to take out Stuart's clothes to the cleaner. "What was it like out there in the Atlantic Ocean?" inquired Mr. Little, who had never been very far from home. So Stuart and Margalo told all about the ocean and the gray waves curling with white crests, and the gulls in the sky, and the channel buoys, and the ships, and the tugs, and the wind making a sound in your ears. Mr. Little sighed and said someday he hoped to get away from business long enough to see all those fine things. Everyone thanked Margalo for saving Stuart's life, and at supper time, Mrs. Little presented her with a tiny cake which had seeds sprinkled on top. There she is. See that? That was her reward. I thought that was really nice. You know what? We've made it to chapter 10. Let me see. Ooh, chapter 10 is a quick, short one. Let's read through that today. Because remember, we want to get as many reading points as possible every time we get together. So here we go. Chapter 10, Springtime. Uh-oh. What usually happens in springtime? Let's find out. Snowbell the cat enjoyed nighttime much more than daytime. Perhaps it was because his eyes liked the dark, but I think it was because there were always so many worthwhile things going on in New York at night. Snowbell had several friends in the neighborhood. Some of them were house cats, others were store cats. He knew a Maltese cat in the A&P, a white Persian in the apartment house next door, a tortoiseshell in the delicatessen, a tiger cat in the basement of the branch library, and a beautiful young Angora who had escaped from a cage in a pet shop on 3rd Avenue and had gone to live a free life of her own in the tool house of the small park near Stuart's home. One fine spring evening, Snowbell had been calling on the Angora in the park. He started home late, and it was such a lovely night, she said she would walk along with him to keep him company. When they got to Mr. Little's house, the two cats sat down at the foot of the tall vine which ran up the side of the house past George's room. This vine was very useful to Snowbell because he could climb it at night and crawl into the house through George's open window. Snowbell began telling his friend about Margalo and Stuart. "Goodness," said the Angora cat, "you mean to say you live in the same house with a bird and a mouse, and you don't do anything about it?" "That's the situation," replied Snowbell, "but what can I do about it? Please remember that Stuart is a member of the family, and the bird is a permanent guest like myself." So there they are, the two cats discussing the little bird, Margalo, and Stuart Little. I think I know where this conversation is going, don't you? "Well," said Snowbell's friend, "all I can say is you've got more self-control than I have." "Doubtless," said Snowbell. "However, I sometimes think I've got too much self-control for my own good. I've been terribly nervous and upset lately, and I think it's because I'm always holding myself in." The cats' voices grew louder, and they talked so loudly that they never heard a slight rustling in the vine a few feet above their heads. It was a gray pigeon who had been asleep there and who had been awakened at the sound of the cats and begun to listen to the conversation. "This sounds like an interesting conversation," said the pigeon to himself. "Maybe I'd better stick around and see if I could learn something." "Look here," he heard the Angora cat say to Snowbell, "I admit that a cat has a duty toward her own people, and that under the circumstances it would be wrong for you to eat Margalo, but I'm not a member of your family, and there's nothing to stop me from eating her, is there?" "Nothing that I can think of offhand," said Snowbell. "Then here I go," said the Angora, starting up the vine. The pigeon was wide awake by this time, ready to fly away, but the voices down below continued. "Wait a minute," said Snowbell. Don't be in such a hurry. I don't think you'd better go in there tonight." "Why not?" asked the other cat. "Well, for one thing, you're not supposed to enter our house. It's unlawful entry, and you might get into trouble." "I won't get into any trouble," said the Angora. "Please wait till tomorrow night," said Snowbell. "Mr. and Mrs. Little will be going out tomorrow night, and you won't be taking such a risk. It's for your own good that I'm suggesting this." "Oh, all right," said the Angora. "I guess I can wait. But tell me, where will I find the bird after I do get in?" "That's simple," said Snowbell. "Climb this vine, enter George's room through the open window, and then go downstairs, and you'll find the bird asleep in the Boston fern on the bookcase." "Easy enough," said the Angora, licking her chops. "I'm obliged to you, sir." "Well, the old thing," whispered the pigeon to himself, and he flew away quickly to find a piece of writing paper and a pencil. Snowbell said good night to his friend and climbed up the vine and went in to bed. Next morning, Margalo found a note on the branch of her fern when she woke. It said, "Beware of a strange cat who will come by in the night." It was signed, "A Well-Wisher." She kept the note under her wing all day long, wondering what she had better do, but she didn't dare show it to anyone, not even to Stuart. She couldn't eat. She was so frightened. "What had I better do?" she kept saying to herself. Finally, just before dark, she hopped up to an open window, and without saying, anything to anybody, she flew away. It was springtime, and she flew north just as fast as she could fly, because something inside her told her that north was the way for a bird to go when spring comes to the land. That's the end of chapter 10, and there we see her taking off in springtime, heading north. I know I want to find out what happens too, but we did really well today. We read for about 20 minutes. We're continuing the Stuart Little story, and if you're all done, you can go off and do what we're planning to do after our reading break. But for all the parents and friends and teachers and other siblings that are here listening to us, the reason we're doing this reading challenge is because we are logging in reading minutes to then I put them into my count in the SaveTheChildren.org reading program. It's a summer reading program where we log in all our reading minutes, and then children who don't have access to books and resources will get them. So that's one reason that we read each week a few chapters of different books. We just started with Stuart Little. This is week 4, and we made it through chapter 10. The other reason that I think it's important for us to read together and to read with our children is, like I've explained in the videos before, I wanted to show all our kids that listen and stay with us that sometimes, even though we struggle with reading, we just need to push forward. And my 2 champions that help me even when I'm stumbling or the letters get a little bit jumbled up when I'm reading out loud, I've got Gus Duck and Susie May, and they are my reading champions, and they help me to keep going. Sometimes I have to repeat myself. Sometimes I stumble through the words, but that's okay. The idea is to just keep reading. So I'll see you here next time for the next installment of Stuart Little. And on Facebook, if you've got any suggestions for books in the future that we should read, or any nice, kind comments that you have, we will welcome them on Facebook. All right then, thanks so much. This is Reading Rituals with Miss Carmen. I will see you next time. Thanks for joining us. Bye.